Hey, so Video Game Europe released a statement. I thought about reacting to it, and then I saw Ross from Stop Killing Games was going to be reacting to it, so I figured I'd wait to hear his reaction. Yeah, I haven't seen this yet, so let's go ahead and dive in.
Hello!
Hello.
I have a development on the Stop Killing Games campaign. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's recently crossed the 1 million signature mark, though I'm assuming nothing. In fact, I've been given stats that there was a previous initiative that had 250,000 of its signatures invalidated. And I could see us setting a new record there.
I love his reasonableness about this, by the way. Like, he's just, look, I know we got the 1 million and everybody got excited, but I don't trust it. You all need to keep signing. And again, if you support the initiative, you totally should. But I love the pragmatism here. Yep, I've seen this before. I've done my research. I don't buy it. Yeah.
Keep signing. That's the first thing. Second, for anyone who doubts how powerful this initiative can be, we now have a lobbying group issuing a statement about us. Do you think if we had no chance of changing things, we would have lobbyists coming out against us? A big one is
So, I don't know. I don't know if it may just be that because the petition got signed, there's like, okay, we have to go sign it. I don't know if anybody's actually scared. I don't want to overstate this because I think I've seen other people make that same thing. Oh, they must be scared, blah, blah, blah. And maybe just be careful about the assumptions you make there. It may just be, hey, your petition got fully signed, so we feel like we have to say something. I have seen other people that are European game developers go, I don't know who these people are. So I don't know what group this is or who they represent. But anyway, yeah, I'd be careful. Like, yes, maybe it's a good sign for those who are supporting the movement, but don't overread into this.
things, we would have lobbyists coming out against us. A big one is Video Games Europe. Best I can tell, this is essentially the voice of the industry. So of course they're going to be against any proposal we make, because they're ideologically opposed to us being able to retain our games. I really can't emphasize that enough. Even if every developer in the world was for our proposal, the industry would still be against it. Because it's not developers who make most of the big decisions. It's shareholders and companies worth billions.
I appreciate him calling this out. I know he has talked to a lot of developers, and I think on both sides of this debate. I do feel like a lot of this has been fascinating for me to go into as somebody who's been more on the development side, not like the, I don't know, publishing shareholder finance side, to see just how much frustration there can be towards anybody that's called a game dev at all. And so I appreciate him like seeing this distinction and understanding, hey, there are actually different groups here. I would also go further and to say that while there might be ways to stereotype those two groups, my guess is that there are some finance and shareholders and big high up decision maker folks, publishers that actually do support this initiative. It might be fair to say most do not. That I don't know. I haven't seen that study. I would probably guess maybe like most of you that most don't. And similarly with the devs, many do support this, many don't. You'd have to do like a big bunch of polling to figure out. I really don't know where things stand. I'm continuing to talk to more devs about it to get their stance. I talked with a couple people who said they weren't really a fan of it. I talked to someone who they were supportive of it, and they're very informed on the engineering side of how you run games. Actually, all of them were. They were all either engineers or engineering leaders. And so anyway, yeah, but I appreciate him calling this out.
So with that in mind, let's go through this statement quick by our opposition here. We appreciate the passion of our community. However, the decision to discontinue online services is multifaceted, never taken lightly, and must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. I have great news for you, Video Games Europe. We are in no way seeking to impede your right to discontinue online services. We are saying you can shut down your games whenever you want, but you have to do that responsibly, in a way that doesn't take back rights you already sold to customers. Yet some people forget that companies have to sell you some rights to begin with to even play the games. We understand that it can be disappointing for players, but when it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of the prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. Okay, first off, I'm not a lawyer, but this guy at WBS Legal is, and he thinks Ubisoft probably broke the law when it shut down the crew, giving players only 3 months notice, when they should have given more like 2 years. At Ubisoft, one of your members? So this is probably a false statement out the gate. But you know what? That's not even our issue. So I don't even care how much notice you're giving the players.
I think this is important, and this is actually one of the things that could tilt my perspective on this whole issue. So one, I'll just say it because the statement's up. We're going to keep going through it. This just feels like a bunch of corporate nonsense speak, BS, blah, blah, blah. I get it. They said something, a statement on Stop Killing Games. I don't think this is particularly helpful. They try to list out some things, but in not very much detail. Like, this whole statement felt like a big waste. I guess they're just like explicitly stating we disagree. And the German lawyer thinks that this statement, that the second state assault, blah, 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 all these different things. But like, broadly, I think this statement is a bad idea. No matter how much you try to understand the player, no matter how much you might think like we're doing what's right for the players, as we make decisions around this stuff, a statement like this is just too tone deaf in a lot of ways. So anyway, that was my take when I initially read, because I've read the statement before. It just seemed like it probably took people way too much time to put together, and then it was basically boilerplate nonsense. Yeah, I don't feel like this really adds a ton of value to the discussion. If anything, practically, I think it just galvanizes the people who are for stop killing games. So anyway, bad move by Video Games Europe, in my opinion. Anyway, we'll move on from there.
What I care about is that you're not depriving them of their purchase. Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. Okay, several things here. We have to break it down. Private servers are not always a viable alternative option. So they're saying for a new game concept, which hasn't even been made yet, sometimes there is no way they can add an end-of-life plan to the design? Their programmers' fingers simply can't type that? I would love to see them say this to a room full of developers. I think the industry would be surprised how viable it was if the law said you can't take back the limited license rights you already sold to the customer. And this next part. Yes, this part is true. Players will absolutely be getting a rougher and more wild experience playing an unsupported game. I happen to know a thing or two about that. So yes, that's the nature of anything unsupported. That's not a good excuse to destroy what people paid for. It just means they're on their own. But then they say this part. It would leave rights holders liable. Okay, I am not a lawyer, but my first impression is this strikes me as very not true. The way I read this, they're saying they are incapable of writing an end-user license agreement that absolves them of all liability on shutdown. Like planning for end of life, apparently it's just not possible.
Okay, I've been letting that run for a minute here. Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players. I think everything here rests on how we think about the word viable. What does it mean when we say it's not a viable alternative option? If it was ridiculously expensive, does that make it a non-viable alternative option? And the petition is not intended to be retroactive. If you plan this from the beginning, would that mitigate the cost and make it more viable? And so I think the problem here is, and I do agree with Ross on this, you could design games in such a way that private servers or some other, like an offline mode, something like that, would be an alternative option for players. And now we can quibble over the word viable. There's an opportunity cost there. That cost is not just to players of that game. It would be cost potentially to players of other games, because publishers and studios have limited resources, so they choose where they invest their resources. This is one of my biggest issues with this, is we may invest a lot of time serving a very small number of players at the expense of serving more. So it's an opportunity cost argument, effectively. But here, I think I agree with Ross. Like, it's technically possible, and if you designed your game that way, you could do this. It might cost more. In some cases, it might cost a lot more. There are contexts, I could imagine, where the extra cost made it seem not viable or dangerous to the business or whatever it was for some smaller studios or indies or whatever. One of the cool suggestions I actually heard from somebody is you actually look at either a game scale or a company scale before you figure out what the rules are around what they have to comply with. So if you're just a solo indie and your game didn't work out and you're out of money and need to go get a job, and the law's not going to come find you because the 4 people playing your game are like, no, Stop Killing Games says you can't, you need to give me servers and everything. I haven't even thought about that. I don't know how to do that. Oh no, my goodness, I'm like an indie dev. I don't know what I'm doing. I did it all with Claude or whatever. And now I'm being like pursued by the law with a fine until I can try to figure out how to do this thing that I might not have any awareness of. Like, I like that some. It doesn't actually solve all my issues with the opportunity cost, but yeah. So I think I agree with him here. Protections were put in place to secure players' data removed. I also agree with that, and this is where, for me, I'm not against players after shutdown doing their own work to attempt to keep running that game. I've played Star Wars Galaxies, an old MMO. A while ago, so a number of years ago, I got interested in trying it again, and I went and downloaded it, and it was someone called like a gray shard, right? I think technically illegal to run the shard, not illegal to play it, but I would prefer that sort of thing is legal. So yeah, and then when it comes to and would leave rights holders liable, I'm not a lawyer either. I'm not going to comment there. Beyond, I don't know. I appreciate Ross saying he's not a lawyer either. I wish I could just say for sure, oh, that does or doesn't seem reasonable. Honestly, law is so complicated, and not only that, but we're talking about like multinational, like law in different countries. I really don't know.
So me, as a layman, I'm wondering what's the problem with adding a line like this to the EULA? Once our company ends support, we are not responsible for any and all issues that arise from users continuing to operate the game in a discontinued and unsupported state, and absolve ourselves from any and all liability pertaining to its continued
Yeah,
use.
sure, might work, I don't know.
There's probably a better way to say that, but you get the idea.
I just don't know.
They seem to be saying a line like that is just impossible to write. See, I'm puzzled by this, because as a consumer, I've seen all kinds of things have support end, but I still get to keep them? I'm just on my own. That's a very common thing. I think we need a lawyer to weigh in on this.
Oh, cool. I bet he's about to go to a lawyer, which I'm excited about. And by the way, that is also true, that there's a lot of products that are out there that you can buy, and once support officially ends, you still have the thing, and you could do stuff with it. And if you do something obviously illegal with it, you could get in trouble, but you still have it, and it's not like scary to the company. There are other weird exceptions, like in the US, there are people that have tried to sue gun companies because somebody did something illegal, like shot somebody with a gun, and so can we sue the gun company for that? That's been attempted, but it hasn't gone through, and I think it's on that same grounds that you can't hold the company responsible for somebody irresponsible using a product that someone else bought, especially often in those cases there's like a lot of links in between. So yeah, all right, let's see if he brings a lawyer on.
So if we take them at their word, it sounds like they're concerned about protecting customers. Okay, but their solution is customers must have their purchase taken away from them forever. We have to destroy our customers' games to protect them from themselves. I normally don't like to use this phrase because it's thrown around too much, but this is beyond nanny state. This is more like Terminator state.
I would say that's an overreach, but I think we're stretching how you could interpret that into what they're saying. Let me actually go back. Let me go back and read this. Let's see. Yeah, I think... No, I can see where he's coming from, actually, reading this. Hey, we have protections that are in place to secure your data that we feel responsible for, to remove illegal content, combat unsafe community content. That would not exist. Those protections would go away once the servers were shut down. If you had a private server, you would not have that same security. Yeah, I can see where it does... It actually doesn't seem like they're being customer-oriented here. It's the rights holders. That's who I think that they're actually talking about. He's saying maybe they're acting like it's for the customers. I'm like, I actually don't read the statement as it's for the customers at all. I think it's for the rights holders. And it's what might happen if this were to occur. Would there be something that happened on a private server somewhere that would cause us trouble down the road? Okay, so I'm pulling back what I said. I wanted to say, I actually don't think it's nanny state. I actually think they're not actually saying that we're here in support of customers in this statement, in this particular part of the statement. I think they're saying we're here in support of rights holders, and that opens up, again, that legal can of worms.
I normally don't like to use this phrase because it's thrown around too much, but this is beyond nanny state. This is more like Terminator state. Take a game like Star Siege Tribes. For all purposes, that's a game intended to run online with other people, or over a network at the very least. It was discontinued in 2004, but you can still run it today, online. This lobbying group seems to be saying that's a liability. No one should have been permitted to run this game after 2004, and it's a mistake that this game is still allowed to exist because of the risk to consumers. We would have destroyed every last copy of it back in 2004 if we could have. We couldn't then, but we can now. So that's our business model with new games.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. I know also that there's some other stuff. As an example, FIFA. If you go back in time through the FIFA games, you get to a point where music that may have been licensed in the game or player likenesses and these sorts of things expire. Now, what's interesting is you can still play FIFA in offline mode going all the way back through a very long time. You don't have necessarily online modes available. But I think in terms of addressing the end-of-life concerns, actually FIFA, like EA's FIFA games, they're still there. You can go play them in offline mode. I believe that would be in accordance with what this petition is asking for, because it would, yes, reduce functionality. You don't have the multiplayer available, but you do have the offline modes available. But there's a point where it's, hey, now there might be content in these games that we no longer have licenses for that are floating in the ether. And again, this is where legal stuff, right? And yeah, I'm hoping to talk to a lawyer about this soon, but we'll see.
See, I take that as extremely hostile to both customers and preservation. So my question is, why can't we allow customers to continue playing the game by adding a splash screen saying something like, warning, this game is no longer supported. Running it could represent a risk to your security. We assume no liability for what may happen as a result. That strikes me as a reasonable compromise.
I like the idea of that. I think that if that was what this petition was about, is, hey, when game support ends, when we shut down the servers, you are allowed to continue attempting to create your own, you are now allowed to create your own if you want to. And our last patch is we throw like a block of text up when you launch the game that says, hey, just a heads up, this may be unsafe for you. I'm fine with that. Doesn't bother me at all.
That strikes me as a reasonable compromise. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create.
Okay, so even before he reacts, this is what I'm going to say about this. Many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. And that is not some sort of anti-piracy control play. There's a lot of things that players benefit from through making games or servers that are always on online type of things. Some games just don't make sense in the absence of this. And that's becoming more, not less true over time as we're making more and more games in the ecosystem. Now, more and more games are usually they're smaller games, but the big ones tend to be more and more online only. They are designed from the ground up to be online only. And this comes back to this framing at the end. These proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. I think I would say these proposals would force developer choice, not necessarily curtail, but it would like, hey, you have to do something along these ways by making these video games more expensive to create. No one out there on any side has said this is free. In some cases, if you have a single player game that's just got some DRM hookup, it might be relatively trivial, depending on how that was architected. And in other cases, it might be quite a bit more work than this. Taking games that were only ever designed to function online, like modern MMOs, even modern like shooters, and trying to say, let's just strip it out and give you a private server. This could be quite a big ask. The petition says, I want you to have to say yes to that ask. In some way, shape, or form. Something has to be done. And it may be as simple as giving players like a bunch of documentation or something like that in some context. But in order to make a functionally playable game, sometimes this would be expensive. And so in particular contexts, I believe it might be prohibitively expensive to create. Or really what would happen is game developers would do something that is not as good for the ongoing play experience when their game is live because they need to have this ready to go for end of life. And so they make poor trade-offs for players during the time when most of the players are playing the game in order to make better choices for when the game has fewer players and is about to be shut down. That's one of my concerns here. But this statement, again, I don't like this statement really by Video Game Europe, even though I am also not for the petition. I agree with them. Many titles are designed to be from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. That's an assumption. Prohibitively expensive is relative, it's subjective, but I think that is an overstatement of what's involved here. And even saying that, I still disagree with the proposal because I want the game developers to have choice to say, look, I would prefer to actually have the best experience I can have while the game is live and lots of people are playing it, as opposed to having to sink time and effort, even small amounts of time and effort, into what end of life looks like for the game. All right, let's see what Ross has to say.
Developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. Okay, this part is a little more complicated because every game is different.
Yes, that's true.
But when I see this, I'm thinking of auto manufacturers saying how they can't afford to make cars if they're required to include seatbelts in them. Because no one ever made that argument back in the 60s. However, I think there is a big piece being left out of the discussion here. A whole lot of the complexity and cost of making an online game comes from all the microservices involved. And guess what? We don't need the vast majority of them for an end-of-life build. I talked to a developer, and he gave me a big list of examples we don't need. Payment processing, anti-cheat, analytics, voice chat. There's so much here that's not necessary to just run the damn game. In fact, I have a quote from him. We are not asking for 98% of the game. We're asking for the 2% of game logic for main gameplay functionality. Except even that's not true. We're not asking for that directly. We're asking for the same rights we already bought for the game, which they can probably fulfill by providing that 2%, as he puts it. So let's cut out all this extra crap before we start talking about how cost prohibitive an end-of-life build is. Now, that does mean designing games so it's...
There's a couple things here. One, it'd be interesting to see how engineers would break down a largely multiplayer game from a microservices and other features that would be like feature flags aren't a microservice, but like things that you would put in a game that you would want in there, but that would require, like, that a modern player would expect to be functioning, even if it was for it to be a working game? Is there that list? I think there is. It might be shorter. I also am like 98%, 2%. Maybe looking at that from a server perspective, and I'm guessing different engineers would give you very different numbers there, depending on what type of game it is. If we're talking about like list of things on a like these are all the stuff that our game does, but when I think about effort invested, it's not like 98% of the game. If this is 98% of the game, takes 98% of the time or effort. The 2% of the game takes the vast majority. And the challenge is that if I built it to function, assuming these things would all be integrated, what is the consequence of those things no longer being there? I may now need to like have two paths for certain things where, oh, by default we would go to this always online thing because that's is anti-piracy or does one of these things, or is we think it's better for the player because it reduces their latency or what, something like that. So we're doing this in the interest of players or not in the interest of players, but whatever it is, like we think that this thing is how we should do this to create the game, but now we also need to build a second path. The second path would be like a private server or an offline mode way to do this, where that maybe is as simple as commenting something out, and maybe it's like more complex than that. We have to figure out how to get this hooking into a private server. So yeah, that's where I'm on that one.
It's easier to turn off all these microservices is a very good idea. And that also means it may not be practical for some existing games. Good thing for the industry, the initiative is not retroactive. And most publishers already have a local test environment for a game, which I'm told is bad practice not to. That's half the battle right there.
Be careful about that, because those test environments you might not recognize as a functional playable game in all environments. I've seen some people say something like, oh, as long as I can like load into the game for nostalgia's sake, that's good enough. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not a functional playable game. You might need more than that. And the code and everything that might be involved in that may very much be not something that the company feels comfortable putting out there, because often those test environments are janky and stood up very quickly, and they may use tools or third parties that they absolutely aren't licensed to distribute. Like, that's where you get into some weird areas where, yes, it seems like, oh, you have to have a test environment to play the game. Yeah, that may not be something that you want as a player. We were like, okay, we gave you, like, we hacked together our test environment into some sort of package and sent it to you, which would still take time and effort, by the way. And so there you go. Good luck with that. And people would load and be like, yay, I get to play X game that came out 12 years ago. Let me try. What the heck is that? Like, you would be cautious about making assumptions of what's in the test environment. Maybe in some cases it would work just fine. In a lot, I've seen places where that would not be what you wanted.
So this statement? No, this one is meme level. I do not believe the industry when they say this is so expensive, it's not possible. Especially when it's been done many times before. This is seatbelts all over again. And how about getting input from big European developers not on this list, like CD Projekt or Larian? We welcome the opportunity to discuss our position with policymakers. Yeah, I bet you do. And those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. They'll probably be glad to know that's actually not me. I am not the official spokesperson for the initiative. I'm ineligible. I'm more of a super promoter. The reason I'm making this video is I want to inoculate people against these bad faith arguments. Remember, everything they're saying here is their excuse for taking away your purchase with no time frame given and destroying it forever. Is this a good enough excuse for you? It isn't for me, especially when they're lying. I think that's worth taking into consideration.
I'll say it again. I disagree with this statement. I disagree with them putting it out. It all sounds very corporate, and like I said, it went through 7 rounds of feedback with the legal team to make sure nothing could possibly be, I don't know, held against them when it came out. I disagree with it. I do think that his points where he thinks this is lying are a little bit subjective. Private servers are not always a viable alternative. Great. How do we define viable? So if they have a much tighter band for what viable means than he does, then maybe that statement to them is reasonable. I disagree with it. I can understand someone taking the stance that they do and that not being like a bad faith manipulative stance. The would leave rights holders liable. That one's one where, okay, it sounds like a lie to you. I'm just going to say I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. And then these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. That one I struggle with a little bit more because, like I said, I would say these proposals would enforce certain developer choices by making these video games more expensive to create. And I think that's more fair to what's actually happening. Using words like prohibitively, curtail developer choice, these sorts of things. are their framing. And this is the challenge. A lot of this is a framing war, right? Because people are impacted by framing. If you can go do studies on like how framing impacts behavior and things like that. But framing matters. Just like you say they're destroying the games or killing the games, you don't just say they're shutting off the games or they're turning off you're not saying your game copy goes dormant. You're saying the game copy goes destroyed, but from a different perspective, the game copy that you have, like the client code that you have on your system, it just goes dormant. We could say that it's dormant until another server comes along. And that is a fair way to characterize what happens. Destroying, like I said, I disagree with destroying. Killing is also, I think, a fair way. We've killed the game. We've shut down the servers. Stop killing games, I think, is not an unfair description of what you're actually fighting against. But in the same way, they're now using framing and they're on the other side. And so they see it from their perspective and they frame in such a way that they want people to like, oh, okay, look at that. It would be prohibitively expensive. It would be more expensive. So anyway, he's saying this has a lot of lies in it. Some of that. What's your perspective? What's your point of view? I laugh because of Star Wars and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But what's your point of view? Like, how do you view this? There are different ways to view it. It's not simple. It's not 1 + 1 = 2 or whatever. It's complex. I would not go so far to say they're lying. I would say, though, that this was a dumb statement to make that's going to galvanize their opposition.
And on that note, they also released a longer statement. But do I really need to go over this? Why providing continuous support do not work for all games? Oh, we're back to the classics.
So I haven't seen this. It is funny that there's a typo in the first sentence. Maybe he didn't go through 7 committees. Or maybe those 7 committees weren't looking for English typos. I guess it is a European Commission, so that's very likely. All right.
Okay, so they don't even understand what we're asking for. You know what? I'm going to let them figure it out. I played that song enough already. If I have to explain that a 500th time, I want it to at least be to someone who's not being paid to undermine us. Now, they're going to be lobbying politicians with this, I'm assuming, but we can try and do our part too. If you're super motivated on this and are part of the EU, you can contact a member of European Parliament and tell them about the initiative. I've been told you should target ones in the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. There's a link in the description below. Just pick one for your country, and I'm just relaying this next part. I have no idea myself, but I've been told you should maybe avoid PFE and ESN, as they're not known for doing things, is how it was explained to me. And the last bit of advice is a lot of email to them gets buried. So if you want something that stands out, this title was suggested to me. 1 million plus sign European Citizens Initiative. Stop destroying video games. Help us protect gamers' consumer rights. And that's all I have on Video Games Europe lobbying against us.
There's an underlying thing I have here. There's these government agencies. We got to be really careful. They're buried in emails. They're so busy. Some of them don't do anything, like the PFE and the whatever it was. I just have such little faith that these governments are going to come up with good, reasonable regulation around this. Assuming I thought that there was a viable, like, good, reasonable regulation. I said this in the last video I made about this, but intention, impact, incentive. We have intentions. We create regulation to try to get to those positive intentions, and the intentions are positive. From Ross, from so many others. We create incentives. The incentives are hopefully from those regulations going to cause us to have the impact we want to have. Often they have other impacts, and I'm very concerned about that in this case. And I'm very concerned about not taking the opportunity cost of these things seriously. Yeah, I think the rest of this, I'll watch the rest of it just to make sure I'm not missing anything that I wanted to respond to. But there's my summary. Like, I think Ross is obviously the opposition to this. He took a harsher view than I would, but I also think that this wasn't a great statement by whoever Video Game Europe is, or Video Games Europe. They should have thought more about that, because this, I feel like, is just going to galvanize and cause more issues. Anyway, if you're for this thing, go do what you got to do. Ross has the info and the data on how to do that. I think it will impact players negatively, devs negatively, the industry negatively, and it'll be a pain if it goes through. And I think the most likely outcome is nothing happens. And I heard from somebody recently that actually they don't have the same sort of rules around precedent that might happen in the United States. So that might not actually be that bad of a thing. If we have a discussion around this and nothing happens, maybe that's not as detrimental to the future of consumer rights around video games as it would be in the United States. So that gives me a little bit of comfort if that's true. If there is some sense of precedent, then I worry about this, because it may set precedent not just for our industry, but for other industries where something in this space is actually more impactful to those involved.
All I have on Video Games Europe lobbying against us. For now, I guess. A quick update to the last video. I didn't mean to scare the hell out of everyone signing. If you made an honest mistake filling out the initiative, it won't count, but don't worry. I don't think you'll be in any trouble with the law. Just don't spoof fake signatures. That's the part that's a big deal. Also, don't sign if you're not voting age.
Gamers be gamers. Oh, we're min-maxing all over the place.
I've said this before, but it's been a while. there's always 50 things to cover. Finally, if you have made a mistake, you might be able to get it corrected. Get in touch with the official spokesperson, Daniel. His info is on the initiative page. All right, that's it. Keep signing to make sure this happens.